Thanks, Claire. So it's interesting, when we think back to the 20th century, we often think of it as very polarized, of course, communism and capitalism. But actually, if you think about it, they kind of agreed on something. They agreed on the problem. Everyone agreed the best way to understand and indeed to act upon the human condition was political economic. And so whether your interpretation was communist or capitalist, they had this shared question, this shared problem. I think one of the challenges that we face now in the 20th century is we no longer actually agree on even what the problem is. There's certainly no shared problem that we all agree on, to which we have different good faith answers or solutions we're proposing. But one thing we do seem to think, though, we kind of do agree on the problem, because we agree the problem is each other, which I think is much more fundamental in thinking it's something you believe, it's who you are in a sense. And if you want to think of it almost in terms of a epidemiological framing, we're often looking at each other and we're saying, you're the disease and I'm the cure, and vice versa. So the Trump lot look at the woke lot and say, they're the disease and we're the cure. And of course, the other side say the opposite, right? No, you're the disease and we're the cure. But I've been thinking about this for a few years, and I remember thinking that maybe we're missing the point. Maybe our epidemiology is wrong. What if we're neither diseases nor cures, but all of us sort of opposite but symmetrical symptoms of a shared disease that is in need of a cure? And we keep getting distracted by confusing the pathology and the symptom in a sense. If you take Trump and the Trumpism, whatever you want to call that, and then sort of wokeism, if you want to call it that, look at the two sides. They're very symmetrical. On the one side, of the Trump side, you have a very figurative use of language, make America great again. No one's quite sure what it means. Sounds good. Then on the other side, you have a very literal use of language. A lot of these activists have a very literal use of language, that words are violence. Often language is taken without any sense of context or intent, and that's the basis of comedians being cancelled quite often. But also there's another symmetry, that the Trump lot want to go back to a halcyon past, make America great again, like it used to be. And the other side wants to leap to a utopian future, saying it's never been great, but we can achieve it somehow in a sort of millenarian sense. There's also another symmetry, that on the Trump side there's performative strength. It's quite macho. All those podcasters are always working out for their podcasts. And then the other side, you've got the performative fragility. I'm so vulnerable. I'm so delicate. And they're very interesting symptoms. Now, there's an interesting thing. If we're talking about epidemiology, in the history of how we understand biological contagion, we only really became modern 500-600 years ago. Why? It was because we began to discern the difference between a symptom and the pathology. So we stopped looking at the pustules of the Black Death and thinking that's the disease. We realized that's the symptom. And only when you understand the difference can you treat the disease. But I'd put it to all of you that actually, in how we understand not biological contagions of the body, but ideological contagions of the body politic, you and I, we're all still medieval. There's nothing different between how we think about these things in the 13th century. And it's quite interesting on this, because the word epidemiology, if you look up the original Greek, doesn't mention the body or disease. It translates as the study of what is upon the people. That's it. Now, I would put to you that ideological contagion is upon the people as much as biological contagion. The difference is we don't have an epidemiological framing to understand this, so we keep looking at each other and saying, you're the pustule and I'm the cure, It's like with the Black Death. So if I'm framing it like this, that we are symptoms, that we're actually symptoms, not pathologies or cures, as we tend to think of ourselves as being, what is the disease? And I would suggest that the disease we have right now is what some might call sort of neoliberal hyper-capitalism. If you look at the Trump lot, who are the people who vote for Trump? I'm generalizing here, of course. But in general, they tend to be a bit older, a bit more blue-collar, middle America. What happened to them? All their dignity and their livelihood went overseas with jobs elsewhere. Globalization happened to them. Neoliberalism happened to them. And we all kind of know that story. But then, and by the way, it's worth noting, if you go watch an American movie from the 80s, it's often set in the American suburbs, like E.T., and the suburbs are always a utopia, a place you want to go where magical things happen. Now, if you watch a movie about the American suburbs, it's a dystopia. It's dark water, it's corruption, it's drug addiction. And then look at the other side. Okay, that's the Trump lot. Look at the woke lot. So look at all these kids. I mean, in this crowd here, there's not much sympathy for some of the woke or neo-Puritan ideas, but think about it symptomatically. What is happening to that entire generation? They can't afford, first of all, got massive student debt, which even I didn't have 20 years ago. A degree here was £1,000 a term, now it's 10,000. America's way more, of course. They got massive student debt, houses are unaffordable, they can't find stable jobs, and when they do, they're not well paid. So they know they will not have the life their parents had in the suburbs to raise them. But what can they have instead? They can say, well, I have my virtue, like Franciscan monks, barefoot but virtuous. If you see it that way, it's slightly more sympathetic. We keep looking at the symptom and thinking how annoying it is. But why are people like that? And I don't think we have enough empathy for the fact that there is an underlying, or not even empathy, analytical sort of, 1 minute, okay. So my point here is that my basic conclusion here is that at the moment, we have this sort of culture war framing. If you fight fire within fire, you just end up with inferno. You don't really achieve anything. And I do think that what we need to do is start to look at our problems slightly more dispassionately, to develop an epidemiological understanding, so to speak, so we can actually start identifying not what is the difference between us that I'm right and you're wrong, but what is the shared problem of which we are all suffering, regardless of where you're coming from. So that's my argument for Kumbaya. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam.